Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. I'm going to unravel Iran and the current crisis that we see. Will there be a World War III on the back of an attack on Iran? Will the Americans back off, realize that actually Iran has the power to be able to hit back hard? And are the Zionists capable of manipulating a situation in which a war is inevitable? None of it is guaranteed either way. It seems there's an on pass and then it's on again and it's off again. We're left with the questions, therefore, and to answer some of the questions about how things are shaping in West Asia itself, the neighbors of the Islamic Republic of Iran and others. What is the situation there? Surely any war that kicks off is going to affect, first of all, the neighbors of the Islamic Republic of Iran, who house United States bases and also have the interests of many, many US companies, etc. There. Now, with me to unpack this is Patrick Henningsen, who's the founder and the owner of 21st Century Wire, and also a co-host on the UK column. Patrick, welcome to the show. Give me your overview on the war on Iran, the impending war in Iran.
You know, it's amazing. I think it was in 2011 or 2012, I was approached by Al Jazeera English, who were working on a documentary called War Plan Iran. Mm-hmm. And they asked me back then, when I was just getting started, for my assessment, and they made it into a sort of short documentary. And back then, we were looking at the different domains of warfare: cyber war, and then kinetic, hard military power, MOABs and things like that, bunker busters. So some of it crossed over to what we've seen over the last 12 months. But I think right now, you know, the geopolitics of the region has just transformed so massively in the last decade, because now you have a situation where you have emerging secondary powers, not just state actors, non-state actors as well. You have disruptors that have come in. We have Yemen, which is, you know, or the Ansar Allah, the part of Yemen. Yemen is effectively partitioned at the moment because of the Saudi and the U.S. proxy war, really using Saudi since March 2015 to take down what's left of the Yemeni resistance. But that is to say, this is an emerging regional actor that is quite significant. Plus, we have the Hashd al-Shabi, which has emerged in Iraq, which is effectively a militia that was activated when ISIS appeared on the scene in the summer of 2014. And the Ayatollah al-Sistani issued a fatwa, call to arms mobilization for the People's Mobilization Units, or the Hashd al-Shabi. They're now a force in Iraq, in addition to Iraq's regular military. And then we have other actors, ISIS, Al-Qaeda remnants. We have an Al-Qaeda leader in charge in Syria, backed by the West, backed by Britain, and backed by the European powers. Turkey has also probably increased its profile in the region as well. And Iran has emerged as really a regional power, and it has demonstrated what kind of power it is, not once but twice over the last 2 years with Operation True Promise 1 and 2. And the 12-day war, we saw things. I mean, even to see missile salvos coming over the occupied territories and landing during True Promise 1. I mean, I never thought I would see this in my life. Somebody actually fired back at Israel. And to see the 12-day war, the battering that Tel Aviv took and some of the military facilities there, really, I think it put the region on notice that not only is Iran going to be barking, but they're willing to bite as well in terms of...
It was Israel who called for the ceasefire.
Yeah, they did.
After 12 days, they'd had enough.
They begged the United States to intervene, to put a lid on it, because if that 12-day war went on for 2 more weeks, you would have seen I absolutely believe that you would have seen the complete destabilization of the Netanyahu government and also Israeli society. Why? Israel did something very desperate during that all those missile barrages from Iran. They prohibited Israelis from leaving Israel. Imagine a country that small getting pelted day after day and the government saying, you can't leave. I mean, that is an act of desperation. That showed you they were just at the edge of completely fracturing as a society, and the government was losing credibility by the hour. And that air of invincibility that Israel had of just this total deterrence in the region, that myth was shattered during that period. It was really shattered during True Promise 1, but really it was a wake-up call for a lot of Israelis and also for the United States and other people in the region and the Gulf Arabs as well. And so that brings us to the present moment. And I think the U.S. has always had problems calculating, even internally, running war game scenarios, attacking, invading, boots on the ground. All of these things have come back with very, very bad conclusions and results for the United States in terms of their having any advantage in some kind of a military regime change or decapitation or major war against Iran. And the problem is the United States is completely exposed regionally. We have the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. We have the major military hub in Qatar. We have bases in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait. We have facilities in Syria still, in the illegally occupied some parts of Syria. In Iraq as well, the U.S. has a presence, although it's withdrawing some of its assets in anticipation of the fact that Iran has promised the United States, if there's an attack on Iran, they would view it by the U.S. or Israel. They would view that as fair game to strike back at both Israel and U.S. positions in the region. So the United States has to then weigh up: do they want to sacrifice their military footprint in the region in defense of Israel? And so that's a real geopolitically. That's a dilemma for the United States. They've sunk a lot of cost into the region, but really, when you look at the U.S. positions around the region, and we used to think that this was to protect the oil or to control the resources, but the amount of oil the United States gets from the Persian Gulf, it's minimal at this point, and what are they doing there? Why park all of these naval assets in the Levant, off the coast of the Levant? Why have all these positions around? Why try to control the Red Sea? Why are they so concerned about having freedom of military movement in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits? All of these different positions. Why? Why do they need to be in northeastern Syria? Why Jordan?
Yes.
Why? Every single U.S. position in the region, well, we learned why during Operation True Promise 1 and 2. All of those positions were activated to create a missile defense umbrella for a very small strip of land, roughly the size of New Jersey, called the State of Israel. Requires all of that military perimeter. We're talking thousands of miles in either direction. Must be activated to repel drones, missiles, aircraft. So all of that's necessary. The full might of the U.S. military machine is required to protect this
slither of land.
State. And the cost of that is just, it must be enormous. On top of the aid the U.S. gives, on paper, $3.8 billion a year in military aid. Of course, it's much more than that, and especially since the special supplements after October 7th.
Yeah, 30 billion just recently, and I think then the private funding, nobody talks about the private Zionist funding of Israel as well, that are based in America.
That too. So all of that is necessary to protect Israel. Now and the United States is running this at a time when it's already stretched thin with the war on Ukraine and all its other commitments in the Pacific as well as South America, opening up another front against Venezuela. And so now you see the empire is fully extended. And you also have to ask yourself, you look at the U.S. National Security Strategy paper, which came out before Christmas, and it's really harping on the Western Hemisphere. We must dominate the Western Hemisphere. A new Monroe Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine, as Trump has renamed it. And so this is absolutely essential, but they're playing catch up, and they're paranoid because the Chinese have gained ground in South America, in Central America, and they feel like, well, we're playing catch up here. We've got to move quick on our hemisphere.
Yes.
Why did the United States turn its back on? It had total dominance over the Western Hemisphere through the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and all of a sudden, the U.S. focus shifted to the Middle East. Why? And then comes that issue with Israel determining and directing U.S. foreign policy. Why did the United States bog itself down in Iraq for the better part of 2 decades, 20 odd years in Afghanistan, etc.? This is all part of that perimeter to defend and protect the state of Israel.
The peripheral document, the peripheral doctrine of the Israelis was well known. Actually, the Shah of Iran, when pre-revolution, was a pivotal factor. Absolutely. Azerbaijan still remains part of that peripheral doctrine, and one assumes the Kurds.
Iraqi Kurdistan was established for that reason.
So this was the periphery, because at that time their fear was that the immediate Arab nations, the Arab nationalism led by Egypt primarily, Jamal Abdel Nasser and whatever, that was their principal threat. It seems that that threat no longer exists because they're all bought into Israel and the American,
subdued and normalized, as it were.
And the periphery, in a way, I guess, combining Iraq, Iran, and Yemen, well, that's become the problem now for them. And so everything is geared towards trying to eradicate that problem, I guess, for them.
And so now with, if you look at current U.S. stocks, Patriot missiles, the Israeli Iron Dome is a U.S. designed and stock system. It's not, there are some Israeli components to it now, but for the better part of 20 years, it was an array of U.S. Patriot missile systems, branded as the Iron Dome, staffed and run by U.S. military personnel, run out of Stuttgart, Germany. And it's been incorporated into the IDF, large parts of it, but it's still totally dependent on the United States. And the U.S. is having to parlay a lot of these things for the protection of Kiev, is an example. And then they have other positions around the world. So 2 weeks, by anyone's estimate, 2 weeks. If the war goes longer than 2 weeks, they can't sustain it. They don't have the ability to defend Israel.
Can the U.S. sustain something longer than 2 weeks against Iran?
Maybe it can, but only just. And is that going to be enough? What's a victory? Is a victory destroying infrastructure? Is a victory killing tens or hundreds of thousands of Iranians in bombing attacks? Is a victory wiping out its oil refineries? I mean, what constitutes a win for the West when it comes to engaging Iran? This is a question we don't know in their minds anyway. What we do know is that if Iran retaliates against Israel, they will inflict probably much more damage than they did the first time. And so what's that going to mean politically? That's, again, going to weaken the political calculus within Israel, and it's really a question of time. And the current government, President for Life or Prime Minister for Life, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's going to get blamed if the damage is inflicted? Is that they're not going to blame the Iranians. They're going to blame Netanyahu. Israelis will blame Netanyahu. The Europeans will ultimately blame Trump and maybe Netanyahu. They're not going to blame Iran for retaliating for the second unprovoked preemptive war against Iran. And they can't even, the Trump administration can't even decide why they're attacking Iran. Before, 3 weeks ago, it was 4 weeks ago, whatever, it was the peaceful protesters, or these democratic burgeoning flowers of democracy are blossoming in Tehran, and they're being put down by the mullahs, and we must defend these democratic protesters. And then that's gone to the wayside.
As Mossad was, as Mr. Mike Pompeo revealed that Mossad were with those peaceful protesters, and I think that narrative all fell to bits. So then they've gone back to the nuclear narrative.
Well, we thought the nuclear program was destroyed after the Operation Midnight Hammer. Trump told us, "Oh, it's all done. We've won it." And then now they're pivoting away. Then they pivot towards the missiles. Iran must give up its missiles. Well, I mean, why would any country want to remove any chance of self-defense? I mean, it didn't work out well for Libya. Didn't work out well for any other country that's been attacked or put under those types of rigorous conditions for, quote, peace. And this is also happening while the Trump administration, the U.S. government, is really being viewed openly as a gangster kind of rogue state now, whereby they're not even trying to put any kind of varnish of diplomacy on anything. And it's really saying, well, the Iranians got to come and make a deal, otherwise we're really going to be angry and we're just going to let it rip. So I think this opens the door for other countries, I think, to come and align themselves closer with Iran, allied countries potentially like China and Russia, for instance.
Well, they're sending a joint military exercise, a set of ships are on their way. And we would have thought if Russia and China turn up with their ships in that same Hormuz region, it becomes very, very difficult for America to launch an attack. And maybe some have been arguing that Donald Trump deliberately missed that window that he had when they had their Mossad and other agents fomenting trouble, that he missed, he didn't pull the trigger, which actually means he lost the window, the one window he had.
Yeah, to while there's instability going on, and clearly these were staged infiltrators with arson, killing civilians.
What was their objective, do you think?
Their objective was to destabilize the Iranian society and law enforcement and the labors of social stability and control. And then it would be followed up by massive airstrikes, whereby hitting centers of government and institutions, and then broadcasting that out in the global media, and then back into Iran via BBC Persia and all these other Western propaganda outlets, to give the overall impression that the, quote, regime has lost control.
Right.
And if the regime, quote, loses control and they feel like, that they're bleeding, and then they can go in there and sort of finish them off with special forces, other sort of targeted surgical strikes, or just wear them down over a period of time. And that seems to have worked in the past with other countries.
Venezuela, I guess.
Iraq is a good, that's how Iraq started. It was just a constant barrage of 7,000 cruise missiles over the course of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and they just were taking out positions. Now, the United States doesn't like to attack a country that can hit back.
Right.
This is a no-go area for modern U.S. military. Everything's predicated on rapid reaction forces, surgical strikes, overwhelming air power. And the minute you bring in a country with credible air defense, at least with a 400-mile range or something like that, equivalent of an S-400 defense battery or something like this, which Iran has their own proprietary air defense systems who do have these ranges. And all of a sudden it gets more difficult, it gets more tricky, because the political price of a downed aircraft in the United States is huge now, or a naval ship that's been hit. And,
tens of billions of dollars.
It's the optics on the
and also prestige, the myth of.
Now that can swing both ways, because if you're parking all of these naval assets in the Persian Gulf, it also means that maybe another state actor might see an opportunity for a false flag attack. Now, it's not as if Israel doesn't have this in its history.
Yes.
It has. Not only has it done it, it's done it to the United States.
The Liberty.
The USS Liberty during the Six-Day War.
Was downed,
1967, killed dozens of U.S. soldiers, and to blame it on Egypt in order to force Lyndon Baines Johnson was the president at the time, LBJ, to force the United States deeper into what could have been a world war in the Middle East at the time. And as luck would have it, there was a Russian listening naval vessel nearby that also relayed what was happening, and that diffused the situation. So
they went quiet, they covered it up.
Very tense time. That could happen again. Why? Because who benefits from dragging the United States and escalating? Israel benefits.
Sure.
It can't take on Iran by itself. It needs the United States to do the heavy lifting. Right. That's why it's hugely dangerous. That's why I don't understand why the United States will put 1 or 2 aircraft carriers within the Persian Gulf or within earshot of the Straits of Hormuz, because you're really just almost asking for a country like Israel that has a history of false flags attacks, even against its main ally and sponsor, the United States. That could happen again. By the time that headline and the excitement and the fear makes its way around the globe a few times, even if there's an investigation, it's too late by then. We're into potentially a thermonuclear or at least tactical nuclear exchange, which the world, at that point, all bets are off, and no one's really going to be discussing why it started. That will be unpacked in years later, but you're into a series of events that, and a level of chaos that you're either on board, you're either with us, you're against us, and everyone's going to be taking their sides in a war situation internationally, and any dissent, like what we're talking about here, would be deemed as a threat to national security at that point. Right. Even if it was started by a false flag by our greatest ally, the only democracy in the Middle East, as they say, the State of Israel. So that, from the military point of view, just these are some of the dilemmas that the United States will be facing. And not only that, Iran can hit Diego Garcia with missiles. It can hit all of these U.S.
base, a little island in the middle of the Arabian Sea, I think, somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
And they've been pushed out of Iraq, or they voluntarily left Iraq in anticipation of this. Now, this is where it gets interesting, okay? Now, at the same time this is happening, ISIS was let out of jail. So in Syria, all of these prisons that kept all these ISIS fighters in camps with their families for years, were the Syrian Democratic Forces, the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces there that the U.S. was partnering with to occupy 25%, illegally 25% of Syria's territory in northeastern Syria. And then basically the U.S. walking away from the Kurds.
Yeah, they've dumped them. They basically betrayed them.
They've dumped them, as the U.S. normally does. Yeah. Eventually they'll dump them. And now the ISIS fighters are on the loose, as it were. So what's happening now, it's pretty clear. What would the target be? Well, the target's not Syria, because you have an Al-Qaeda, a U.S. and British-backed Al-Qaeda head in Damascus, so the target must be Iraq.
Yes.
But the difference between 2026 and 2014, when ISIS appeared on the scene, seemingly out of nowhere, taking Mosul, and then rampaging through Iraq, coming within spitting distance of Baghdad, and that the difference is there were no people's mobilization units before ISIS emerged. There were after. Iraq mobilized, and that's the people's mobilization units, the Hashd al-Shabi, this fatwa that was called by
Ayatollah Sistani has a powerful voice on that whole situation.
And they were merged into the under the Iraqi Ministry of Defense, and they still exist. We're talking 120,000 fighters, and they're based in regional hubs in towns, cities, and villages. Right. They have an intelligence network. They can remobilize. They probably could fill the ranks with even more young recruits since 2014. So they're there. So I really don't see the remnants of ISIS having nearly the level of success that they had, because they had the element of surprise in 2014. They don't have that now. And so they could create problems for Iraq, but when you have a political situation in Iraq that's much different and much more, I think, in terms of Iraq, whereby accepting its Shiite identity, its political national identity,
majority,
that any squabbles between Sunni and Shiite in Iraq politically it's kind of an internal political conversation. I think there's a consensus in Iraq that the United States have a strategic framework agreement SFA.
I see.
The FSA, that's the sort of standing forces agreement between the United States and the Iraqis. This includes diplomatic presence and embassies and things like that. The minute Iraq is being used or its airspace is being used to attack one of its neighbors, that agreement is null and void.
Right.
And so this is the dilemma the United States have, because the overwhelming attitude and belief in Iraq right now is that they do not want to allow their airspace to be used for an attack on Iran.
So it would be a violation of Iraq's sovereignty, which would give the Hashd al-Shahabi the reason to basically rally all of Iraq towards a defense of Iraq, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah, and also evict any U.S. presence in Iraq, any remaining U.S. presence. But it's all about the airspace of Iraq. And this includes Iraqi Kurdistan, because that is still officially part of Iraq, even though it's an autonomous self-governing region for the most part.
But there have been murmurings that the PKK is now being trained by MI6 and other deep state here in order to potentially attack Iran. So Iraqi territory, especially that northern part, could be still an area which is a flashpoint where the secessionist agenda, which wasn't triggered last time, I think, as much as maybe it could be, but certainly Azerbaijan is Zionist, essentially. Completely, Aliyev is a Zionist.
Very much allied with Israel. Yeah.
The Kurds have a strong connection. Israel has a strong. In fact, Iran, I think, bombed them. They attacked their bases, Mossad bases, in retaliation.
In Iraqi Kurdistan.
In Iraqi Kurdistan.
That's right.
So that tells me that actually the next possibility is that Israel and America think that whilst the internal agents have failed, first of all, there may be some backup internal agents that can be revitalized, whatever.
But a large part of that network, I think, was exposed and taken down to a degree that probably surprised Western intelligence.
Which may mean it completely impossible but certainly possibly border incursions. Balochistan with the Al-Jundala and Pakistan being a little bit lazy and lax as well on that front, has to be noted. And on this side, it's the Kurds. And of course, the Azeris are not averse towards wanting southern Azerbaijan, which is inside Iran. So there are cards that could be played to destabilize Iran. And the Iranian army, not the IRGC, they've openly come out and said, we're ready. We're going to take out anything that goes on. So they are ready for that incursion as well. Do you think there is a possibility that they'll go for that option? Is further destabilization via other forces, ISIS, etc. as well?
Well, many in the West and Israel will view that as a viable option because they believe that they successfully executed this during the dirty war on Syria from 2011 till really Damascus fell.
And it took them 14, 15 years, but they kept at it.
They kept at it, and why they managed to do it is they managed to stretch the Syrian Arab army so thin in resources because they have to defend and address flashpoints in areas, and to the point where they had to withdraw from whole places like Idlib and whole sections of northeastern Syria and so forth. During peacetime or normal times, if you had to deal with one incursion or one flashpoint or just Kobani or just Al-Tanf, but imagine doing that, not only all 6 or 7 of those at a time, but also having to defend suburbs of Damascus and Ghouta from being occupied by terrorists. So what they did was they stretched the Syrian army so thin, and then with sanctions on as well, over time they managed to suffocate and really destroy and implode the country.
So the difference between Iran and the Syria scenario is that, number one, Iran does have allies. Like the Yemenis have said, the Ansar Allah have said that we will launch missiles if Iran is attacked. Those same Hashd al-Shahabi have said we've got ballistic. They just revealed underground ballistic missile capability themselves.
And that's their biggest ally is Iraq right now.
So that Iraqi force is ready to be mobilized. Then, of course, you've got this the scenario, I guess, where Iran is looking at the US and looking at Israel and saying, actually, you know what we see? We see that Israel, a million people left. So your economy is in tatters and the Palestinian issue hasn't gone away, and you're still very much struggling now to have any kind of safety the way you used to have it. Your society cannot feel safe in Israel. How many of them are going to use their dual passports to say, well, is this really a game that we want to be in here now that missiles can attack us? they're also seeing, the Iranian establishment is also seeing that a huge aircraft carrier has turned up in the area, but these days hypersonic missiles don't bother about aircraft carriers. They could easily hit that. If the Yemenis could scare off the aircraft carriers, and the Iranians have seen that the Americans couldn't handle the Yemenis, who have infinitely less power, then Iran has got a lot of encouragement to say, actually, you're kind of a paper tiger. You can flap all you like, but we're not scared, and we're capable of hitting back very, very hard as well. And you need to
closing the Straits of Hormuz, which would create huge tumultuous shocks through the international.
How huge, Patrick?
Huge in the sense that if petroleum and oil supplies were stopped for a period of a week, then you would immediately start to see the price of oil go up to, probably towards $150 a barrel for 2 weeks, going up to sort of 160, 170, more than 2 weeks, a situation where, towards $200 per barrel. Now, that would have huge implications for the United States. They would have to implement price controls, all sorts of things, because the American public and the voters in America, there's Trump supporters, Trump's base, he would be finished. He's already flagging in the polls with a 61% disapproval rating as of the last week of January 2026. So I mean, you add an oil shock to that, and it's devastating. Now, we had a situation like this in the 1980s with the tanker wars during the Iran-Iraq War, and it's very important. We should also study how that progressed and then how it ended up. But what we did learn from the tanker wars in there is that the United States was out of area, and to be engaged navally and military way in a foreign body of water like that, it's hugely risky for the United States, and they did not want to be doing that for very long.
Right.
But what did happen is you had problems like airliners, passenger airliners being shot down, and things like this. So that's not good for the for the U.S. either. So there's all kinds of problems with the United States being. It's one thing to be posturing there and just shooting down missiles. It's another thing to be really deploying hard naval power there, or trying to enforce blockades, because that's going to affect all of your Gulf allies as well.
Yeah, and that was the last point I want to come to, because all of those Gulf allies, and including Turkey as well, even further out, all went running to Trump, etc., and saying, don't do this, don't, because Iran has said very clearly, anybody who allows missiles to come through their territory, anybody who has a base which is used by the Americans or the Israelis, is basically fair game for us, and we will light up oil fields, light up US bases, and actually attack all your territories. And that is a big deterrent. And do you think that's going to swing those regional powers to continue to say, we're not going to support an American assault, which would then mean a long-term assault is even harder for them to engage in?
I think that's probably a pragmatic and practical conclusion that the Gulf Arabs would come to, and I think the last couple of months there's a game changer happened, is they realized that the number one threat in the region is not Iran, it's Israel. When they hit Qatar during negotiations with Hamas, the sneak attack hitting Doha, the Israeli Air Force. I mean, that's just unbelievable. If you told me that a year ago, I would have told you that will never happen.
And Saudis got rattled by Israel's presence in Somaliland as well, the recognition of Somaliland.
That's right.
So they're beginning to see that actually there's a little danger here. And then the Saudis also attacked the UAE, who are very strongly linked, of course, to Israel. They're the front organization for Israel. And they've hammered them in that southern region of Yemen as well. So Saudi definitely shifted in some ways. You're absolutely right. Yes. And they're saying to the Iranians, we're not involved. We don't want to get involved in any aggravation with you guys.
Well, they won't be just involved between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Yemen will be involved. And Yemen showed what it can do with very rudimentary drone or missile technology to take out full Aramco oil refining facilities. And that's Yemen from a few years ago. Today's Yemen's much more advanced. So the last thing Saudi wants is to have to deal with both Iran and Yemen. This is a losing gambit for the Saudis.
In conclusion, Patrick, what if you had Donald Trump's ear, what would you be telling him now?
Well, you know what I would probably be telling him was like, "What the hell are you doing? You know, why don't you use American resources for American interests rather than Israeli interests? Because clearly, this brings me back to, I mean, the brief time that I visited Iran in 2017, I was shocked at how not pro-American, but how much affinity Iranians had with Americans.
Yes.
Even the Islamic Republic of Iran, and driving American cars and very versed in American politics. And I thought, well, we're not incompatible. These two countries, we're very compatible. And so what on earth are we doing? Why aren't we trading together? Why aren't we partnering in business, in energy, in technology? Iran has a formidable engineering and tech, science and tech industry and academia as well. So like, why do we have to have them as our sworn enemy, the United States? It doesn't make any sense at all, but it does if you're not in charge in Washington of your foreign policy, and that the Israeli lobby is in charge of your foreign policy. And there are geopolitical hawks in America who will say it's in America's imperial or hegemonic best interests to weaken Iran because they don't want Iran to be the hinge of China's Belt and Road initiative and the bridge to Europe, and that's against our interests and all the rest of it. But the bottom line is, if you think that 2 weeks of missile barrages against a country and a civilization state like Iran is going to somehow scare the Persian people from ever wanting any independence in the future, this is a problem because there is no. I don't think there's any long-term win for the United States, not conventionally, but this is the danger is that you're talking about nuclear armed powers, the US and Israel, that they might see that scenario as unwinnable or unmanageable, but you find an excuse like
strategic nuclear,
like a downed US aircraft carrier sinking in the Persian Gulf, smoldering, smoking, and that hitting the evening news in the US, and at that point Congress and Senate are basically demanding a full spectrum, tactical or maybe thermonuclear strike on Iran to send a message. Maybe a symbolic target is hit, but this would take the world in a direction I think that just would be, for our generation, for world history, would just be something horrible. And so there are a lot of people I think that are concerned that Israel is playing its final hand. And that the United States, at least this administration, is also, imperially speaking, is playing its last hand. These are two desperate hegemonic partners that cannot accept the fact that the region is moving on, and the region's in a post-colonial phase. We don't know what shape this is going to take, but clearly there's a post-colonial phase. They want to be the center of, prosperity. The Gulf Arab states want to be leaders in technology. They want to attract global capital and finance, and they want to have innovation hubs and all of these things that the West used to aspire to, but no longer build anything. So, that would all come to a screeching halt potentially if this thing goes hot against Iran. So there's a lot of this is a major inflection point historically for the region and for the world, and and so to suffice and make a long story short, there it seems to me like the region as a whole has more to gain from de-escalation than from escalation. You still have the problem that Israel poses to the Palestinian people and to the neighboring countries, that Israel is hell-bent on bombing, attacking, or doing coercive measures to bring their governments to heel. Jordan's a good example. Syria, Lebanon, and the list goes on in the United States. But just generally, is this manageable? Can you control the fallout, the reactions? And the Iraqi is a very significant piece. It's a very significant
piece. The whole jigsaw, yes.
and the religious element in Iraq is very significant. That, you know, the religious leader in that country is kind of the unofficial glue that holds that country together and just keeps just manageable. Having a U.S. presence there, and it's only because the Ayatollah in Iraq, Ayatollah Sistani, seems to moderate public mood.
Yeah.
Because if the religious, the Marajia, I think the name of the
Marajia, yeah. If he gives a fatwa to say we don't want them here, it would be a different story.
Overnight, it's a different game. And the United States is very lucky that the Iraqis have been cautious and, dare I say, conservative on that front. But if the U.S. and the Israelis are determined to send, you know, extremist takfiri bands of fighters into Iraq, as they did previously, directing, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory to say that the United States and Israel have been a guiding hand for Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the region, because if you look at how
Jake Sullivan has said it, you know, Clinton said it, Trump has said it.
too many official admissions there. Yeah. So let's be real. If they're hell-bent on applying that pressure, then there's going to be a reaction, and it's not going to be a reaction that the U.S. likes, and that they're going to be able to manage, quite frankly. And they have to think about that. Okay. They have to think about that. A lot to think about. It's
a very, very difficult, very complex situation, but you've helped us to really unpack a lot of the factors that will determine whether there is a war or not. Of course, nobody really wants war. No sane person wants a war where nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles are all, flashing at each other. That you'd have to be a madman to want that war. But evidently, we have plenty of them in power. We elected them, and I think that's where we need to do some navel gazing here in the West. How is it that we're electing individuals into power who think it's even feasible to go into these kinds of forever, unwinnable wars, and ones which actually don't benefit us economically either? The war in Ukraine has crippled Europe. That's a fact. The war in Iran would cripple the world, potentially. So I think we all have an obligation to see sense, campaign against war, make sure that our governments are more accountable and don't just follow these kinds of forever war policies. And as far as the Islamic Republic of Iran goes, for those who've got stereotypes about it, perhaps go and visit it. I've visited several times and I never found any discrimination, any problem. I've spoken my political opinions openly. I've seen women walking around in the bazaars of Tajrish, etc., without hijabs and very moderately. The country is very different from what I think certainly Western hasbara or propaganda has painted it as. And I think that even if it wasn't, what business is it of us to go and interfere in the sovereign internal relations of another country? Have we not seen what happened in Afghanistan or in Iraq or Syria and Yemen to understand that it costs lives of children? Or you can be as ideologically hell-bent on, colonializing that part of the world with neoliberal, secular, liberal Western culture, but the result is death of children, and actually the reverse of what you want is that even women will become more sufferers of hardship. So I'd say, as I'm sure Patrick would agree with me as well, the war is not the way. It's about cooperation, it's about being fair and about being just and trying to live in the world without being a hegemon. Thank you, Patrick Henningsen, and we'd love to have you back again. And hopefully next time there will have been no war as well, and we'll still be in the situation where we can avoid it. Thank you all for watching. Do like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Channels like, of course, 21st Century Wire and DDP rely on your patronage. Do become members and help us to bring more fantastic guests that will give you real insights. You're not going to get it from Piers Morgan. You're not going to get it from most of these mainstream channels. They're all a joke. And I challenge Piers, if you ever going to come to our humble channels, I'm sure Patrick will turn up as well, and we'll give him a run for his money because he talks absolute nonsense. And we would certainly be able to balance the books. But they'll never come to us, will they? And they won't invite us to them because they know too many truths will be unveiled, and their job is not to tell you the truth. Thank you. Goodbye.